All right. I think we have a good amount of folks, and some people might be trickling in. So we'll get started. Again, my name is Shahela Begum. I'm the program director for the Long Island Sound Community Impact Fund. If you had joined us for our last webinar in October, Sarah did a great training on building a budget for this proposal. And so this webinar is mainly focused on any questions you may have as we're getting closer to the deadline to submit LOIs. So I just wanted to introduce Sarah Smith again. She's Restore America's Estuaries Grant Administrator. And if you get selected within the process, she's someone that you will regularly work with for invoicing and things like that. And so I will pass it on to Sarah. And just as a reminder, this is recorded and it'll be available on our website shortly after. So Sarah, I'm going to pass it to you.
Okay, thank you, Shahela, and thank you for taking the time to be here to talk about budgets on a Monday. And so, yeah, we really did want to just carve out some time for people to ask questions if you're working on an application. I do have some slides on kind of the top 10 budget fixes that I usually find when somebody is awarded. The first thing we tackle is going through their budget, making sure everything looks reasonable, and making sure it's in the right federal cost category. So I was going to run through those slides quickly because it might actually answer your questions, and then we'll have plenty of time for any specific budget questions right after that. And if there is a question I don't know the answer to, which is possible, we will make sure we pull the transcript, collect those questions, and get back to folks to let people know the answers to those once I find them. So go ahead, Shahela, and we can start running through some of these slides. So I just wanted to remind everyone, if you were in the last session, that this is federal money, which means that there are federal procurement requirements, and that's something that we'll probably focus on with those who are awarded. If you want to check them out early, you can always Google EPA's Best Practices Guide to Procurement. It's a whole document on procurement requirements and different regulations and all kinds of goodies that you can read now if you so choose. But again, because it's federal money and we are the prime awardee, those regulations are going to flow down to any subawards that we give to folks. And then again, just a reminder that we're here to help. We really want to help you with questions throughout the process. And just a reminder that for this LOI stage, it doesn't have to be as detailed as the full proposal. So if you're kind of stressing out a little bit, as long as you've got a solid kind of understanding of what your budget might look like, if you're using estimates, that's fine. But just knowing that for this first stage, you don't have to dive quite as deep as we would ask for a full proposal. So go ahead and go to the next slide, Shahela. So again, I just wanted to kind of cover the top 10 things that I'm usually asking folks to fix or working through to fix with them. This is kind of the list. And so we'll briefly touch on each of these. So next slide. So one I see very often is if someone's going to have partners or volunteers or things like that, they list all of that travel in the travel category, which seems like it would make sense. But for federal cost categories, only staff of the organization should be listed in the travel category, and it can include mileage. That's the federal mileage rate right now. Per diem for traveling, lodging, airfare, taxis, conference registrations, all of those types of things go under travel for staff of the organization applying. Anything else would go in other. So if you have your own subawardees or you have partners or things like that, if it's a contractor, it's going to be included in their contract amount. And if it's a partner or something like that, it's going to go in the other category. So next slide. So supplies versus equipment. We actually had a question about this morning. So equipment is very specifically if an item has a cost of $5,000 or more. If it's a whole bunch of little things that add up to $5,000, that would still be supplies. Equipment is very specific. It's excluded from the modified total direct cost column. And so you won't take indirect on any kind of equipment. It also is interesting because you have to go through a kind of an exit process with any equipment. So if you buy a trailer or something like that, at the end of the grant, we will help you and work with EPA to see what is going to happen to that equipment. And usually they let you keep it because it's going to be hopefully continue to use for whatever project you're working on. But there are other things they can do with it because it was bought with federal funding. So that's just something, again, to kind of keep in mind about equipment. And then, yeah, supplies are pretty much anything else you might need for the project. I mean, yeah, you can, it's pretty much anything else you could think of, plants, gloves, just anything that you might need to get the project done. So next slide. Modified total direct costs. This is a very common one. It can be really confusing. And so when you look at the budget template we provided for you, you have the award column, and then you have the modified total direct cost column. And so again, this is where, as you're listing out your costs, anything in the modified total direct cost column is what you can charge indirect on. If you aren't charging indirect on anything, you don't have to worry about it. But if you want to capture indirect charges as part of your award, that is the column that you will end up charging your indirect percentage on. And again, I know this can be confusing. We will work with folks who are awarded to make sure that we get this amount correct. Pretty much everything is included. So if you have personnel, that's going to carry over into the modified total direct column. The only things that really aren't are the equipment. And if you're planning on subbing any of the money out to somebody, if it's over $25,000, you can only charge the amount on the $25,000. So again, I know this is confusing, but we will work with folks to make sure it's correct for those who are awarded. And you're also welcome to just reach out and ask if you have questions now, and I'm happy to help walk you through that, because again, this can be a kind of confusing piece of this. So next slide. The details. So again, I just told you that for LOI, we're not looking for you to do a deep dive, but if you can give us a little bit of information just in the budget lines on things, that will be very helpful for us and the reviewers as we're looking at this, so that we have a better picture of what your project is going to look like as far as the budget. If you have supplies, please don't just list supplies and then $10,000. We have no idea what that means. If you can list out, this many trees at this cost for this total, that's great. If you can list out gloves, garbage bags, whatever else for $100, that's great. Please try to include just a little bit of detail for this LOI stage, again, so that we can look at it and think, well, supplies with $10,000, that's crazy. We don't even know what they're going to be or what they're using them for. So again, just try to include a little bit of detail in the budget lines in the template that you're provided. Especially for contractual, it'd be great if you could put a little note in there that says how you got that cost, if it was based on previous work, based on an estimate, things like that. When we hit the full proposal, for those who are invited, we're going to ask for even more detail. So this is a good kind of practice run for including details in your budget. And then when we get to the final stage of somebody that's been awarded, I'm going to ask for all kinds of details in this budget, so we are very clear on what the money is being used for. So next slide. So contract amounts, this is me putting on my stern budget hat. So because of the federal regulations, there are certain amounts that kick in different procurement requirements. And so something we've seen in the past is that folks will break out a contract that might be a total contract of $250,000, but they will be breaking it out into smaller chunks, even though all of it is one contract. I'm not saying they did it to get out of federal procurement requirements, but EPA is very strict on things like that. If it's one contract and it's encompassing a whole bunch of different work, it still needs to be listed as one contract, so we know the total amount of that. So again, this is where don't just guess. If you can get some kind of estimate, so that you know potentially how much a contract will be, that will be very helpful. Also, I wanted to bring up, I'm sure Shahila has talked about this in previous sessions, but if you're awarded, there potentially will be a quality assurance project plan that needs to be written and approved by EPA. And I highly recommend you write that in as a contract or include it in a contract if you already have one. They can be fairly difficult documents to write. You can do it yourself, but again, if you need help with something like that, make sure you write it into your budget so that you have somebody helping you and you have the funds to get that done. If you didn't need one, so let's say we thought you needed one, you wrote it in, then you don't, you can move that money somewhere else and use it for something else. So it's not like you just lose that money if you don't need one in the end. You can just put that money somewhere else. But if you don't put it in, you're not going to have it. So next. So contract versus subaward, this is another one that can kind of get into the gray areas, but in general, a contract per EPA is considered, it's with a for-profit entity that offers the same services that you're getting to the general public for money. Contracts fall under those federal procurement regulations. And then a subaward is more going to a partner, maybe another nonprofit. Usually it's an organization that doesn't offer that same kind of service to the public for a profit. So those are kind of my simplified definitions of contract versus a subaward. Again, I've seen people kind of try to stick one thing where it doesn't really fit, because it might affect the indirect if it's a subaward over a certain amount, or vice versa. You know, you could charge more indirect if it was a contract instead of a subaward, things like that. But it's usually just a conversation that we have if you're awarded, to really try to figure that out, because again, EPA is very strict about making sure these are correct, because they don't want people putting things as a subaward just to get around federal procurement requirements. So again, we will work through this with folks as we get through the different stages. But again, EPA themselves have said, if it's a contract, it's a contract. Like, we're not gonna have people putting it in as a subaward just to skirt the federal procurement requirements. So next slide. So is it reasonable? Reasonable is another word EPA likes to use a lot. They want to know that the costs are reasonable. Again, these are federal funds. They want us to be good stewards of these federal funds. And so again, this is kind of where coming at it with some information and not just guessing is really great, because folks who are going to review your applications will kind of know some of these things or be familiar with projects that might be similar and know how much is reasonable for something. And so instead of, you know, saying that each tree is going to be like $100, if they're really only $10, you know, that might throw your budget into question on if it's reasonable. So again, really do try to do some homework ahead of time if you can. Again, it'll become even more important in the full proposal stage, but the more you can give us on this LOI, the better. If you can justify the cost, that's great. You get into like all these things like sole source, like they're the only ones that do this thing and this is what it costs. And that's okay, as long as we can justify it. But again, they'll be looking to see if they think the costs are reasonable for the work that's going to be done. Next. Printing. Who knows why, but printing should go in other, not in supplies. So if you're going to be printing anything, just stick it in other, not in supplies. I move it all the time. It's just one of those little ones that it's just a federal cost category thing. So next slide. Again, rentals are something that will go in other. So if you're renting equipment or meeting space or things like that, put it in other. Again, it ends up all over the place, but it does go in other for federal cost categories. Next. Food. So this is another kind of interesting one. If you're planning on purchasing any kind of food that isn't for like staff travel, it needs to be written into the budget now. So EPA can get a little I'm not sure what the right word is, but if there's going to be any kind of food, like if you're planning on meetings, not just like staff meetings, but meetings with stakeholders, conferences, training workshops, outreach activities, and you want to have any food, that needs to be put in there now. If you don't, later down the line, we'd have to get it approved with Shahela and EPA, and that could be a little bit more difficult. And so if you think you're going to have any, make sure you write it in. And then we'll have to figure out if it's going to be, yes, go for it. No, don't, you can't serve food. The number one thing is no alcohol can be purchased with federal funds. Even if you are renting a place with federal funding, you can't serve alcohol. So basically just no alcohol with any kind of federal money. But yeah, again, just something that sometimes people don't think about it. And then later on they buy coffee and donuts for a meeting and put it in their invoice request. And then it's like, oh, we've got to go back to EPA and get this approved. So just something to think about. Next slide. So these are just the resources we shared last time. Again, my email address is there. Just feel free to, if you need to email me about a budget question, just copy Shahela so she is aware as well. But these are both EPA trainings that are really actually quite good if you want to get better at building federal budgets. And actually that first link is the best practice guide that I was talking about at the beginning of this. So the other one, it has like 6 or 7 different like PowerPoint presentations. It's just slides that you can flip through. And honestly, I refer back to them quite often because it's a lot. There's a lot of different regulations and things to follow. So again, if you want and you have time, feel free to explore those. And if not, that's why we're here, to kind of help be a buffer to figuring out all of these different regulations and budgets. So I believe that is the end of our slides, Shahela.
Good. Thank you so much, Sarah. I believe we have a few questions. If you guys have any questions right now, this is a good time. One of the questions is, what is the procurement threshold for contract amounts?
Yeah, that's a good question. So up to $10,000, you don't really have to do anything. You should still show that you kind of shopped around, mostly so you can say like, no, I didn't hire my cousin at 3 times the rate that somebody else would do this work. So that's kind of the first threshold. 10,000 up to 250,000, that kicks in 3 informal bids. And so they can be an email, they can be off a website, something like that. But you'd have to show 3 informal bids, and one could be from the company that you were hoping to work with. You would have to have those on file to show that you actually went out and did some research, shopped around a little bit. And then over 250,000 kicks in formal procurement requirements. And there's a whole section in this best practice guide that's putting out basically a request. It has to be public, usually on websites, newspapers. I believe it needs to be public for 30 days, comes along with a lot more documentation, scoring evaluation of why you're choosing who you're choosing, being able to justify that. So yeah, there's a whole section in there about the formal procurement process if something is going to be over $250,000.
Thank you, Sarah. There's another question from Patrick Gannon. Is there a price limit to single major item purchase or purchases?
There's no price limit. Again, it just depends on what kind of purchase. So if it was a contract, it would fall within those procurement thresholds we just talked about. If it is equipment and it's over $5,000, it would kick in the no modified total direct cost thing, and any kind of disposition at the end for the equipment. But otherwise, there's no, single item limit. I think that was the question.
Thanks, Sarah. We have another question from Danling Jiang. Does the actual expense have to be below the budgeted amount, or can it be slightly different?
If I'm understanding your question correctly, if you write in a certain amount for something and it's over that amount, you're going to have to move money from somewhere else to cover that, or you're just going to have to cover that yourself. So we can play with the money between budget categories a little bit, but no, if you overspend in one, you're going to have to underspend in another, or just cover that cost yourself. So hopefully that answers the question. If it doesn't, please let us know.
Yeah, and Dan Ling had another question. Can you clarify contracts below $5,000? How about amount paid to a partner organization? They are not contractors, right?
Right. So usually if it's going to be with a partner, if it's like not a partner in the sense of like a for-profit company, it's going to become a sub-award, which would be listed in other, and you don't have to do anything really other than write that into your budget as a sub-award to this partner. And again, for LOI, we probably won't ask you for a lot of detail about what that money is going to be for in your sub-award, but in full proposal, we'll say, okay, you're giving this much money to your partners. What are they using it for? Is it for their personnel? Is it for supplies they're going to buy for the project? Is it for, whatever else they might be doing for you? So yeah, if it's under $5,000 and it's a contract, maybe it's for a website or something like that. Again, you don't have to do any formal procurement requirements, but just being able to say, like, yes, they have a good rate for the people in our area doing the same kind of work. If EPA ever asks us why you're spending this much money on this certain thing, just being able to justify that is really what you need to be thinking about. So hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. Are there any other questions? Give it a few minutes.
Yeah, and again, feel free to reach out and email me or Shahela. If Shahela doesn't know the answer, she'll pop it over to me or vice versa. But happy to help. I feel like the more you can kind of dive into this stuff, the stronger you're going to be, writing these budgets in the future, especially if you want to apply for other federal grants. And so it'll kind of hopefully give you a good start to being able to write a really solid budget for any kind of proposals you put in the future.
So I'll give it one more minute just to see if there's any other questions. And like Sarah said, her email is on the last slide. This recording, along with the slides, will also be uploaded. And then you can also schedule a one-on-one call with me. And if there's anything that I don't know, I can always loop Sarah in, as she mentioned.
And I would just encourage folks, I know the deadline isn't for a couple weeks, but if you can try to at least get into the system early and start kind of filling out things. It's a new system for us. And so if you do run into any problems in the grant system, the application system, please do reach out and let us know. Because again, this is the first application we've put live in this system, and we think it's going to work really well. But if there is anything that you're running into, please let Shahela know so that we can troubleshoot that or put something out for everybody to let them know if it's a question we're getting quite often, that we can let people know, hey, here's the fix for this, or here's this one step you might have missed that's going to fix everything. So I do encourage you to at least get logged on, create an account, and start an application. You can always come back and finish it later, but just so you have some time to familiarize yourself with the system, and we can troubleshoot with you now or next week or the week after, instead of like 10 minutes before the deadline. So
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Sarah.
yeah.
We'll also be uploading just a quick video on how to submit your LOI for folks who have any questions around that as well. So I see there are no more questions on the screen. So thank you for joining our webinar today. And hopefully, the process is smooth for you. And if you have any issues, you can reach out to us. And looking forward to reading your proposals. Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much.